Hey there, and welcome to That Independent Streak. I'm your host, Wendy Campbell, and you, my dear, are in the right place. If you've been looking for a tribe of sorts, a place where you can talk about all the things, or at least hear conversations about all of the things, then this is your new home. Now, here we talk about health, wellness, we talk about travel, relationships, money, we talk about all of those things combined, because all of those things are the life that you're living right now. And today is no exception, frankly. I reached out to today's guest, again, in kind of a plea of sorts. Having been on the dating scene for, oh gosh, like 7 years now, it seems like a little bit of a treacherous environment. In fact, the dating app's a little bit scary, if you will. So, personally, I've been taking a little bit of a hiatus. I'm kind of a romantic. I want the things. I want, the one guy who's not sleeping with 15 girls. I want, like a healthy relationship. I know, it's crazy. So I reached out to a professional. Donna Shugrue is the owner of Perfectly Matched in Colorado Springs. She is a matchmaker, and she's been doing it forever. So I figured if anyone would have the answers, it would be her. So we dive in today with Donna Shugrue. So I was thinking we could start with how one becomes a matchmaker and how you kind of started your journey, because it's fascinating to me that anyone would say, I want to deal with independent people and bring them together, because there's a lot of crazy involved in that too.
Okay, well, the first motivation was that I was divorced and I was going through a divorce and needed a job.
Uh-huh.
So I started looking. At the time I was in real estate, and at the time that was, oh gosh, in the late 80s, and the interest rates were like sky high. So I thought I got to find something else to do. So I answered an ad in the paper and it said, "Are you crazy?" And then it talked about a dating service that was coming into Denver. I'd already actually put my toes in the water in Colorado Springs and had started a dating service for a man who came into town. He didn't know how they worked. He just he knew they made a lot of money on the East Coast and the West Coast doing video dating.
Mm.
So he approached me when I was in real estate, and I thought, sure, let's give this a try. That was my first step into it. But that didn't last long because of decisions that he made. That's when I looked to Denver and saw the ad in the paper. Actually, I saw the ad in the Colorado Springs paper, but I ended up going to Denver, and I worked for two national services for a total of about 2.5 years. And that's where I was exposed to the profile test that I use. And after 2.5 years of doing that and commuting to Denver, I knew I had my tool and I knew I wanted to be a matchmaker. So I came home, I sat down at my kitchen table, and I thought, what am I going to name my company? I mean, I had no money. I
Right.
was going through a divorce, but I was going to start a dating service, and I did. And in a one-room office that was like in I think 3 to 6 months, broke down the wall and had a nice big office. Anyhow, that was my motivation for getting into it. But once I got into it, actually, once I took this profile test that I work with, and that man told me what it told him about me, I said, I want to know how to do that. And now I do.
What kind of
So I've worked with
personality tests do you use? Like, how does it all come?
it's
I've got a million questions, so I'll let you finish your story before I jump into the personality test.
This profile test, I was told, was designed by a psychology department over 100 years ago. And some of the questions on it are so dated that you can tell it's old, but no one ever thinks it's that old. And I haven't researched that either, but I can tell you this, it works. It cannot be a coincidence that the couples that continue to work out are the ones who have the most compatible scores. It means that you meet someone who thinks much the same way that you do in these six major areas: temperament, how easygoing or not easygoing you are. Wouldn't you love to know that before you even meet someone?
Hmm.
Sociability, how outgoing or not outgoing. Conformity, how you do or don't conform to society in general. Affection, religion, and finance, how budget minded or not budget minded you are. Those are great. I mean, it's great information to have. So all of my matches start with those scores. And again, this test works. I mean, the people that have met and married and stayed in relationships through Perfectly Matched have been together for over 30 years now, many of them over 20, and a lot of them in long-term relationships that don't choose to marry.
Hmm. I think it's interesting when you start looking at the different categories that you match people in. It's so qualitative. When you're looking at different people, how I feel in relationship to money, it may be similar to the way someone else thinks they feel about money, but when you sit down to brass knuckles, it becomes a completely different conversation. So how do you vet through some of that to really understand, how to what's BS and what's being pulled in that's real?
There's no BS on this test because they have no idea what it's going to tell me when they answer the questions. And the questions actually seem pretty benign. And to me, it's all in the numbers. For instance, you mentioned the area of finance. A 5 or below is budget minded. It's being budget minded starts at a 5.5 and goes down. By the time they get down to a 3, they're pretty squeaky. When you go the other way, by the time they get to an 8, they better have some money to go with the attitude. So I'm not going to match an 8 with a 4. I mean, it would just be too much of a spread. I think the closer you get to your own score, the better. And all of the areas except for temperament,
And why?
because I'm sure you've heard the expression opposites attract.
Mm-hmm.
Temperament's the only place they work because two people low in temperament have a tendency to butt heads and fight. Two people too easygoing will avoid confrontation to the point of avoiding communication. So if you're easygoing, you're more compatible with somebody who's going to be there to say, hey, A or B, what are we going to do? If you're low in temperament, you need someone to say, no big deal, calm down. So they balance each other out. But again, you can't go too far with those because if somebody's a 4 in temperament, they're not going to have the patience for somebody who's an 8 in temperament because that person who's an 8 will have a tendency to procrastinate, put things off. It would drive them crazy. They wouldn't have the patience for, oh, you know somebody like that. Yourself or your husband?
Oh no, I'm not married. I'm just, in fact, that's how this all started. I was sitting with a girlfriend. We were sitting around looking at dating apps, which is, I have the dating app on my phone, not because I use it, but because I have friends who are, also single, who are always like, hey, let me look at your dating app. Let's see what's out there. Let's take a look at it. We have these conversations over drinks. I rarely actually match with people on dating apps, but it's good entertainment. But the question becomes, we have all these dating apps and all these services and all these algorithms that are going to match people and pair people. And I don't understand, maybe it's because it's a computer doing it, but I don't think they work personally. But
You don't know if they work, you said?
I don't think they do. I think, when I get on the dating apps, and when I look on the dating apps, it seems like they're, just the flood of all people.
They are, and this is what I hear over and over again. Time consuming, ineffective. People aren't honest. They don't live here. They don't look like their pictures, and they lie about everything.
Mm-hmm.
And you never know who you're really communicating with. Online dating, especially, has become so polluted and dangerous in the last number of years. I don't know how anybody can do it with any sense of safety. And I hope if they do it in a safe way and not have somebody pick them up at their home or meet at their home. But another mistake that people make online is they invest, honest to goodness, days, weeks, months, even years communicating with someone and not meeting them. And they think they have a relationship and they've exchanged pictures. So they think they know what each other looks like. And then if they ultimately don't meet in person, that's another kind of a relationship that's out there. And many of them don't, and they're okay with
Mm-hmm.
it. And they either fade away or whatever. But so often they meet in person, and all it takes is for one of them to not be attracted to the other. And that's it. All that
Mm-hmm.
time you invested in communicating and getting to know this person was a waste of time if you meet them and know instantly you're not attracted to them.
Right. That is one issue. Another is that there's a lot of bots out there. So there's a lot of non-people that are out there scamming. There's a lot of there. It's a cesspool right now.
It is. I had a lady the other day. She said, I'm tired of weeding through the weeds.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly. And I mean, and when you do, there's a few things that we talked about. We talked about going to singles groups, and then I was informed that most of the people in the singles group, and I don't know if this is true, but
are
that
women.
well, there's a lot of women, which is a problem, but then they're all into like swinging, which is also a problem. I mean, not if that's what you're into, that's great. It's not my scene. But there's a lot of relationship jumping. So they're not really in a relationship. They're not looking for a relationship. They're just looking for partners for the night, which is a different scene entirely. It's not my scene, but there's that, and then there's also different. There's all these different tools that people are trying to circumvent the online dating apps with. And that brought me back around to you because growing up and really starting my career in Colorado Springs, I've heard about you for years, right? So the conversation was, why aren't there good matchmakers out there, and how do we find one and talk to one to find out how to, let's say you are using an app, let's say you are dating, or trying to date. How do you find people? How do you find quality people? How do you vet them? What do you do on that first date?
It's a part-time job,
It's so
honest to
much more
goodness.
than that.
It and it's not safe. And you can't be naive and be on there either. You need to really be diligent about doing the best you can to, first of all, meet this person right away. Don't
Mhm.
invest in conversations and times and even days. Just say, you know what, if you're serious about meeting me, let's meet for a cup of coffee and spend an hour and see what you think.
Mhm.
So, I think that there are ways to do online, but it is so, just listen to what you just said. I mean, it is so time consuming. And then you don't know if you're in fact talking to the person you think you are.
Right, right. And men catfish too. So I don't know if you're familiar with catfishing, but
I am
men
familiar with
also post the wrong pictures and do all the things that they accuse women of.
the
So
longer
it goes both ways for sure.
it does go by both ways. And the longer I'm in this business, the less I think anything is a man or a woman thing. It's an individual thing, and it
Hmm.
goes greatly to your upbringing.
Interesting. Interesting. So how do you vet people when they come in to talk to you? Because I mean, obviously you're not going to take everyone, but when people come and talk to you, how do you vet them to partner them like as a human? Like you mentioned your quiz, but it's almost, another unscienced algorithm, right?
Mhm.
So how do you vet people to really understand what they're really about, what they're really looking to meet, and then how do you just intuitively know where they go?
Well, first of all, I do have very good intuitive instincts. And secondly, I am a matchmaker. And when someone calls me, the questions that I ask them, not everybody comes in to meet with me, because one of the questions that I ask pretty quickly is, so you're divorced. How long have you been divorced? And may I ask if you've been dating? And if you've been dating, have you had any serious relationship? And through those questions, I can tell you almost without fail whether or not somebody is emotionally available and in the right frame of mind to meet someone new. Because if they're not, I'm wasting their time and my time. I mean, if you're still hung up on someone, or if you're still crying the blues over someone, or if you still are having an intimate relationship with someone, guess what? You're not emotionally available. So the first thing I do is make sure they're emotionally available. Secondly, when they come in, I tell them, and I meet with everybody personally and verify a valid driver's license. So they walk in the door knowing they have to be who they say they are and the age they say they are. Part
Mhm.
of my agreement states that if you've given me any false information, I can cancel your membership and keep your money. So people don't tell me they're divorced if they're not.
Mhm.
And it's just a matter of really matching one at a time and getting the feedback from them and on them that allows it to become more focused and fine tuned. And that's where the matchmaking comes into play.
Mhm. Um,
I do more coaching and counseling than I do
oh, I'm
matchmaking.
sure. I'm sure. I mean, I've noticed, and maybe it's women too, but these at this age level, and I'll be 51 this summer. At this age level, you've got men who seem to want to date women who are 30, and it seems as if there's almost like a lack of direction towards actual relationship. Do you coach to that too for men, or and it may be women too, but do you coach to that? And what would you
It
say?
is men and it is women, and I do coach to that. You know, what was the question?
So I guess the question, I'm not even sure, one of the things that, my circle and I have been talking about is you get, we're looking for age appropriate relationships, right? I don't want to be anyone's mom. We're not cougars looking for 20-year-old whatevers. But when we go to talk to men of our age group, they seem to be really interested in much younger women. They want to play the father figure. They want more control in the relationship. They've been married, so they want to play a little bit more. How do you navigate to that, and how do you coach to that? Because I think women are kind of curious, okay, well, I don't really want to date somebody younger, and I certainly don't want to date somebody who's like, in my mother's bracket. I'd like to stay, in that
Well, I
age.
start with, I think age is the least important thing if everything else is there. I think
Okay.
5 years either way of your own age is what's most compatible for most people, and that more than 10 is stretching it. If you
Hmm.
have a whole decade more or less of life experience with somebody, it doesn't usually matter the younger you are, but as you get older, it matters. So in the interview, I asked their age preference. How young will you go? How old will you go? And if they're unrealistic, I'm very quick to say, why would somebody 35 want to date somebody 50? They wouldn't, I mean,
Financially, they might want
and
to.
well, men in their 50s are interesting
Tell me
because,
more. Tell me more.
well, and as far as dating younger, women have gotten just as bad about that as men are. I have women come in here, it's in the older age range for the most part, but they'll come in their 60s and 70s and say, don't match me with somebody my own age. I wouldn't find him attractive and he couldn't keep up with me. And I say, well, what if you do find him attractive and what if he can keep up with you? Because age is the least important thing. So, first of all, I start with that, and the 5 years either way is what I recommend. And seriously, give me a man who's dated somebody 15 or 20 years younger than himself, and he's ready to date in his own age range now.
Mm.
Because you honestly, you're just not going to have as much in common with somebody is that much younger than you. Of course, it works. One of my daughters is married to a man who's 13 years younger than her. It's been a perfect marriage. Not perfect. It's been very
It's been
happily married.
compatible.
Let's put it
Yeah.
that way. So, it's the least important thing. And I impress that upon them too. If you find her attractive and she can keep up with you, date up to at least your own age. And
Hmm.
usually they'll go, okay. And then I go, and 5 years older. And usually they'll go, okay, because it does make sense that if you're attracted to them and they can keep up with you, the age does not matter so much. But honestly, mentioning men in their 50s, I've been in business for 33 years. And this last year is the first year that I've needed men in their 50s. They haven't come in at the rate that they usually do.
Hmm.
And I've done what I can to, work on that. In fact, I'm changing my advertising to adjust that specifically with some digital advertising directed at men in their 50s, and women in their 30s. I always need women in their 30s. That hasn't changed in the whole time I've been in this business. And some of that's because I live in Colorado Springs and my service is local. And there are a
Life was
lot of
good.
military there are a lot of military bases here with a lot of young men. So the young women have a lot more options in general. But you know what? I focus on how many matches I have for whoever it is I'm interviewing.
Hmm.
Once I have their scores from that test, they come in for a 1 hour interview. And once I know more about them and the type of person they want to meet and see them, then I know how many matches I have for them. I share information with them on at least a couple of those people. And if I'm limited for any reason, I'm always upfront about that. And the limitations are number one, smoking.
Mm.
Non smokers today will not meet smokers.
Mm-mm.
Men are always focused on weight.
Mhm.
Even if they sit here with a gut out to here, they want somebody fit and trim. Men
Mhm.
are focused, and women are so focused on height. I can have
Yeah.
somebody 5'2" sitting here, and I'll say, "How short will you go?" And with no hesitation, I'll hear 6 feet. I'm like, "You're going to eliminate everybody between 5'2" and 6 feet." I understand that he makes me feel safe. He makes me feel protected. That's what I hear when I ask that question. Why? Because a taller man makes me feel safe, makes me feel protected. And at some point, I feel like saying, well, get over yourself because they could
Well,
be just 2 inches taller than you and be a perfect match.
I get accused of this often, so I'm going to jump in here
How
with
tall are you?
I'm 6 foot, barefoot. And so I get accused of being overly specific on this. And the reason being is when I have dated shorter men in the past, they get a little Napoleonish, where it's almost like they've got to exert themselves larger. And it's a very weird dynamic. So I tend not to go shorter than myself.
Most women
Not much
don't.
more than an inch, but typically like it works out much better if they're taller.
Of course it does. So basically, you're eliminating everybody under 6 feet, probably under 6'2".
Hmm.
because 60
Yeah.
would be eyeball to eyeball. And that's
Hmm.
understandable. I find that taller women are more flexible on the height than shorter women are, because they know that they're eliminating everybody underneath their height to start
Mm.
with,
Hmm.
because you prefer taller men and men usually prefer women who are shorter than they
Hmm.
are.
Right. Yeah.
So, and the short man complex, I hear about that all the time. I work with plenty of short men who don't have that complex.
Hmm.
I think it's really just your mind that makes you think that you're going to be more protected by somebody who's bigger and taller. And most women do prefer men who are bigger than they are.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is, I mean, that's also another, that's one of those things where I think it's just my own headspace. If I'm going to be intimate with you, your hips better be wider than mine. Like
Oh, you're
you better
telling
be
me.
bigger than I am. That's just all, nothing's coming off if that's the case.
Again, men prefer women who are smaller and women prefer men who are bigger than they
Yeah.
are.
Usually works out that way. You mentioned that you haven't had men in their 50s, and why do you think that is?
I'm trying to figure it out. I think my advertising needs to be directed more towards them. I basically advertise on all three local TV stations and mostly on the news. And since COVID, my membership in the 60s and 70s is amazing. I mean, that brought all those men, older men, out of the woodwork. They're like, I don't want to be alone for the rest of my life. I need
How
to
do
do
you use
something
this
about
oven? Um,
it. So,
that's
but
that's
just,
interesting too, though, because there's a lot of and I want to kind of circle around all of this, but I've talked to a lot of people who are in their 60s and 70s who are struggling to find, companionship, who really very much, have all the great ingredients. They're still active, they're still,
Mhm.
living life, they're still enjoying life. They don't want to settle down, but to find and connect with people at that age group it seems to be a really difficult thing to do. So what kind of recommendations do you give to them as far as finding people and the expectations that they have?
I can match people in their 60s and 70s all day long now because I have that much activity. I really do. Even in the 80s. I have a couple that's dating and they're in their 80s.
That's
And
so
he
cute.
called me and he told me they were going steady.
That's so cute. I love that.
I'm
I
like,
want to go steady with
okay.
my husband. I think that's great. And I do think, COVID did open the door to a lot of reality where a lot of people got an opportunity to see what was working, what wasn't working, where they had gaps in their relationships or their lives. I know a lot of people who separated during COVID because that was way too much intimate time and are now out there looking and are, the world seems a little bit like a mess, but
I've been through 9/11. I've been through COVID, and I can tell you that it's very much that reaction of, putting your life in focus and making the right priorities. When something like that, when those traumatic things happen, people start thinking about what really matters in my life. And if you don't have someone in your life and you'd like to have someone in your life, that goes to the top of the list. And I think that's why I've had so much activity. I had two of my best years in business in 20 and 21. And I still have, again, very good activity in that age range. And in the 50s, I'm going to go to some digital advertising on sports and wherever this gal tells me I need to go. I trust them because I don't like to get into all this technology and stuff. She said, "Do you follow your website? And do you do it?" No, I just stay in business. So I trust the people that I advertise to do a good job for me, and they do.
hmm
But I need to, the definition of insanity. I've been on all those TV stations for 12, 15 years. So now I'm trying a couple of other things.
right, which is fair. Do you think you're also having issues just because, Colorado Springs specifically is, so military driven? I don't remember ever walking more than 4 feet without having 10 different men around me all the time just because it's so bombarded with young men. But you start talking about 50s and 60s, those men have aged out of the military and are moving on into
They're
their
retired
second
and
life.
they're,
Yeah,
yeah.
second lives, and they're moving out of the Springs and moving out of the area.
Well, that age range that you're talking about is 20s and 30s. And I don't have a lot of activity. I don't have hardly any
You don't
activity
need
in the
any.
20s.
Yeah.
And I have again, always more men in their 30s than
Huh.
I do ladies.
Interesting,
So listen,
interesting.
here's the deal. It only takes one right one.
Mm.
I think your odds of finding him through a process like this, where I'm focused on all of these important things, I mean, compatibility, Similar long-term goals, shared interest, pay attention to the issues like smoking, drinking, kids, pets, education, income, intellectual compatibility, and then add the attraction. So it's so much more effective when you start with the things that matter and add the attraction.
So I have a question in regards to that, because it's also come up in conversations. Pheromones. Sometimes with the pheromones outweigh the logic almost any time, and creates that solid bond, and it becomes more of an animalistic, like intuitive bond. Um,
Are you talking about chemistry?
yeah, yeah, I'm talking about
Yeah,
chemistry.
well, it's got to be there and it's got to be mutual. But you
Right.
know
So
what? The
that
thing
that puts all
about
the logic aside of, income and social lives and career lives and family
that's why
beliefs
you
and
start with it up front and
okay.
then add the attraction. When two people are attracted to each other through my service, there's so much more potential for success. And you meet more serious minded people in a service like mine. They've usually already done the online or they're not going to do it. But
Hmm.
more than anything, they want to find someone that they can share the rest of their life with. And in spite of all the advertising I do in Colorado Springs, it's referral business that really,
That's awesome.
I can count on it every year. And that's a part of what's kept me in business too.
So do you service just Colorado Springs? Do you service Denver, all of
I go
Colorado,
about
the
as far
country?
north as Highlands Ranch, and a little further than that sometimes, as far south as Pueblo with some ranchers out further there. But most of my clients are local and they plan to stay here and they look for someone who plans to stay here.
Hmm. Hmm. And I'm looking through all the questions that I have set up for you. So let's see. We talked about the markers and we talked about, if someone is looking, say, outside of your area and they're looking for a credible matchmaker, what would you recommend that they look for?
I used to be connected to a couple in Denver almost all the time I was in business, but about 10 years ago that changed. They just weren't in business. And I know they have other matchmaking services in Denver, but I don't have any connections to them. I usually just refer them to wherever they live to go on and to do some homework. First of all, look for matchmakers, not dating services, and look for somebody who has some longevity, and look for somebody who has some sort of tool like I do with the profile test to help identify what's really important. And I
Hmm.
know that, all of these tests I think all of them have some value, but because I've worked with this one and because I've worked with the people who have the scores and have seen those scores reflected in their relationships and in their daily lives, it's just a much more effective way to start.
I would agree with that. And what are some of the myths that you can dispel? Like, there's a lot of one of my favorites was the Indian matchmaking show. um, there was the millionaire matchmaker. What kind of myths can you dispel from all of it?
That's about money and looks. That's
Oh
all
yeah.
those. That's all. Oh, so what's wrong with that, Donna?
No, I'm just kidding.
But still gonna only take you so far if you're not compatible and have all the other things lined up.
Right.
I watch those shows and I get a kick out of them. The millionaire matchmaker, that was her name, was Patty. It is Patty. I don't know if she's still doing it,
Hmm.
but that's obviously just about money and about
Sure.
people who have enough money to be foolish with it.
Mm.
Because I think there's a value to finding the right person, but I think you also have to look at the odds of the tool you're using and whether or not that has the possibility to even
Hmm.
to provide you with a decent match or a decent fit.
Right. Right. But on the flip side of that, you've got like an Indian matchmaker
Hmm.
who some of that is betrothal, right? You've got to line up the family stars. And then, they come together and they've got to fit those parameters. When I grew up in Pueblo in an Italian Catholic family where they joked often, but not unseriously about like betrothals and you will marry into this family and you will do this. And there are times now that as an adult where I'm like, I wonder if that's not the better way to go. Like if that had been the case, then, all of those questions and the ambiguity of dating, would have been erased. Do you have thoughts on that?
I think that it's worked for centuries for some countries and some people. I think that if that's the culture you grow up in and you expect that to happen, you're much more accepting of it.
Hmm.
And I think that hopefully some of those connections turn out to be good ones. And the families are really involved in that. Are when you marry through a source like that, the families are always a part of the picture. So, all I know is that it only takes one right one. And I just focus on, helping people find that one right one.
Right. And we had talked earlier when you and I were discussing doing the podcast, and we were talking about some of the rules and recommendations that you have for some of your clients when they go on first dates and through that dating process. Can you share some of those?
Sure. First thing is keep the first phone call brief. Just set up a meeting with somebody. Those conversations can go very differently when you meet in person and you know if there's any kind of chemistry. Secondly, make sure you're emotionally available before you put yourself out there because really you're wasting everybody's time if you're not. Um, and what was the question?
Just there were a few recommendations you had,
Oh,
on
okay.
your
So
yeah.
first of all, keep the phone call brief. Set up the meeting to be brief, not lunch, not dinner, 1 hour. And then through my service, at the end of the meeting, they both agree to get back to me with their feedback. And it's really the feedback that I get from them and on them that allows this to become more focused and fine-tuned. But when people do meet and they say they're going to go on hold, which means they don't want me to match them with anyone else, they're going to be exclusive. My first rule is no sex for the first 3 months, if I'm not already too late with that advice. But
Hmm.
honestly, it takes most people about 2 to 3 months to get relaxed enough to be themselves. And that's when you'll start to identify the things that do or don't work. And I can tell you that it's so much easier to walk away from something that hasn't worked if you haven't been intimate. Also, being intimate too quickly can ruin something that might have potential. You don't know each other, you don't really understand each other. And if something doesn't go right and it gets awkward or uncomfortable, it's just easier to say this didn't work out.
Hmm.
So if people would follow that one simple rule, no sex for the first 3 months. I had lunch with my grandson and my daughter, and he's 24. And I said that rule, and my daughter laughed out loud as much as he did. And she said, not in this age, Mom. That's the first thing they're going to do. So I let it go. And then when I talked to him for his birthday a couple of weeks later, I said, I want you to know I still think that's the best advice that I can give you. He said,
Hmm.
okay, Grandma. But,
I mean,
but
you're not wrong,
once
but
once you're physically involved, you're emotionally involved. It takes the focus off the friendship and puts it on the intimacy with somebody you don't even know.
hmm.
So it's not a big deal. Wait 3 months. And sometimes you'll be so glad you did. And if you've done any dating at all, most people have experienced getting into it too quickly and knowing, like 2 or 3 weeks down the road, this isn't going to work out. So
Hmm.
just keep it on a friendship basis for the first 3 months, especially if you're serious about finding someone.
And what do you recommend if you have gone through that 3 months? I mean, to your point, it is easier to end things when you aren't romantically involved. But you get on date three, date four, date five, and you realize you really don't like this person. Stepping away can be. Some people get very emotionally involved in those first three to five dates.
Don't do that. I
Yeah.
mean, be realistic. This is a person that you don't even know. You have to develop the friendship first. Focus
Hmm.
on the friendship first. And, it's so much easier to do that if you don't try to include the intimacy.
Yeah. Very true fact. True fact.
And if you're not interested, tell the person you're not interested. And you don't have to say, I'm not interested. You can say, I don't feel the chemistry. I don't feel the spark. I don't feel like we're compatible long term. Nobody's ever going to say, I'm not attracted to you. But ultimately, that's what it comes down to. And so don't not say anything and let them keep calling you and not answering or putting them off. If you know you're not interested in someone, do what you would want them to do for you and let them know.
Hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. And what are we going to do to get these 50-year-old men involved?
I'll let you know. It's going to start the 1st of May with the new advertising.
I know a
And
lot of ladies who are looking for some quality men, and it's slim pickings, my friend.
well, it depends on where you're doing your picking.
Oh, that's probably true too. No judgment there. What haven't I asked you that I should have?
um, the secret to a successful
Oh,
relationship.
let's get deep into this one. I want to hear this one. Hang on. Let me get situated. Okay, tell me.
It's not deep, it's simple.
Oh,
If both people want the relationship to work, it is going to work. I've seen people go through people who work 2 jobs, go to school, have kids, still make a relationship work. So just be as sure as you can that you're with somebody who is as into you as you
Mhm.
are into them. And that really makes, I mean, if 2 people want a relationship to work, it's that simple. It's going to work. It
How can
only
you
takes
how
one.
can you how do you coach to telling that though? Because I know a lot of people who believe they're in really compatible relationships. They believe that they're on the same path. And then it's seemingly out of nowhere, a relationship ends. And so they're left trying to figure out what happened and where it veered off. Would you say that that was just not, there wasn't the attraction that they thought of? Or, I mean,
Attraction has a lot more to do with it, just the way a person looks. Sometimes it's their sense of humor, sometimes it's their intellect that immediately makes them more attractive to you. I tell my clients all the time, don't look for the he knocks me off feeling. Look for the little spark, because so many times it can be just a little spark that grows. And because I choose for people instead of them choosing for themselves, and they don't see pictures.
mhm.
I can't tell you how often somebody will call and say, well, when I first saw him, I wasn't sure. But even in a 1 hour meeting, they're already feeling a spark, a click, a chemistry. Anytime somebody tells me they're on the fence, I say, go out one more time. I've
Mhm.
seen on the fence go all the way. So,
Hmm.
but turn the situation around. That's what I always recommend. If you were the one that was on the other side of this situation, what would you want him to do? So be kind to people. If something is ended for you, don't lead them on. Let them know. There are nice ways to say, this just doesn't work for me. And I, whatever else you need to say to make them feel not so bad about it. But it's a whole lot better than just letting them think you're still interested and getting phone, leaving messages that don't get returned, or keep hoping that maybe you're going to spend some time with them. So be upfront with people if you know you're not interested, and don't lead them on.
Agreed. And do you have, so the new thing, I guess, is ghosting, and I guess we've talked about catfishing, ghosting. How do you I'm trying to think of the right way to ask the question, because it's obviously if you've been ghosted. I guess the question really is in communicating with someone new. I have some friends who are really good at it and some people who are less skilled at it, but over communication, under communication, texting versus talking. What do you recommend on all of those?
No texting.
I know,
No
right?
texting when
I
you're
hate
first getting to
texting.
know someone. I mean, you don't know them to start with, and then you don't have eye contact, you don't have body language, you don't know their sense of humor. I can't tell you how often texting has ruined something. Now, I have no control over that, obviously, but I do have control over the fact that they don't presume to text until they have met in person and agreed that they want to get together again. He picks up the phone, he calls her.
Hmm.
If he doesn't catch her, he leaves a message, she calls him back. And that's the only communication I want until they meet in person and see if there's any kind of chemistry.
And even after that, though, in those first initial months, 1 or 2 months, do you coach away from texting?
I tell them it's the worst way to try to get to know somebody new,
Yeah.
really. And there's nothing that substitutes for one on one time, especially
Hmm.
when you're first getting to know someone. And yet I find that, people in their 40s and younger, even in their 50s, even in their 60s. But, texting is not a way to get to know some. Texting is a way to say, I'm running 5 minutes late,
Hmm.
or something like that, or call me when you get a chance. I like to see them keep texting out of the situation for as long as they can and realize that the one on one communication is really what's going to allow them to get to know this other person.
Hmm. I do have a friend who has been in a relationship, and I wouldn't even call it a relationship. It's been very casual for probably 6, 8 months, maybe a little bit longer, maybe a year, where she's been friends with said person for a few years. They've been texting, like they've met, they've hung out, they've, done dates and everything, but the texting is there's so much more texting than actual interaction that she's actually pulling away and doesn't want anything to do with it because there's no connection. Like after a while, you're just dating a
Exactly.
text message.
That's exactly right. You
Hmm.
just can't, again, nothing substitutes for the one on one time.
Hmm. Yeah, totally agree with that. And then there was another question that came to me while we were talking. Um, what do you think dating is going to look like in another 5, 10 years?
We're all going to be dating robots.
Oh God. At least we'll know what they want.
You know what? I hope that people will continue to focus on the things that are important and realize that the physical attraction only takes you so far. I know it has to be there. I also am very concerned about the fact that people in their 30s don't seem to be at all interested in getting married or having kids. I
Hmm.
think that's not going to take very long to be very much of an
It'll
effect on.
devolve quickly. Yeah.
Yep. So, I just wish people would approach relationships like they do friendships, and not even go out when you go out with somebody, don't even think about romance potential. Just think about whether or not this is somebody you would like to have for a friend.
Hmm.
And, it's hard to do that because the chemistry and all of that, is a part of it for sure. But don't don't accept behavior from somebody that uh you wouldn't give to them. In other words, if something doesn't work for you and you know that it doesn't work for you, don't settle for that. Just say, hey, this is the deal that doesn't work for me. And if we can work on it, great. And if you're not interested, that's okay too. But, focus on the things that matter and then add the attraction. If you could just do that, but you can't on your own because physical attraction is all you know when you meet
Right.
someone. You're attracted to each other.
Well, and that's
Whoopee.
that's if you're lucky enough to have met the person. In a lot of cases, and I think this is the problem with the online dating is that, it's like shopping on Amazon. Swipe, 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 swipe. It's like you're shopping for some kind of spark that you're not going to ever get because until you interact, you're not going to know. And it
Well, you're,
almost makes me
yeah.
miss going, being out like, you used to meet guys in the bars or you used to meet guys, doing different activities with your friends or whatever. And now it's like you go to a bar and men don't talk like they used to, like they don't engage
You
like.
know what I had a client say to me the other day? He's in his 70s, but he said, I used to go out, and he's so cool. He's in country, he's a rancher. Anyhow, he said, I used to go to the bar scene. He said, but now I go to the bar scene, I'm not even sure she's a woman.
Right. I mean, that goes both ways.
Anytime you meet generically, I think you just have to be aware of the fact that even though you're attracted to each other, you have to have a lot of things working for you in order to have a long term relationship and to pay attention to those things sooner rather than later.
Hmm.
Income is one thing I find people have a tendency to not even think about until they're already in love with someone.
Hmm.
It's like if you don't have somewhat compatible income levels, you can't make similar lifestyle choices. So I
Right.
think it's important to pay attention to being with somebody who's on a somewhat compatible income level.
Hmm. I learned that one the hard way, but yes, I agree with that one. And I think values are important too. I think, when you get down to the brass knuckles of values, somebody who is not aligned with the way that you want to live your life, regardless of what that way is, that can kill a relationship too. Because if you're trying to do one thing and they're trying to do another thing, it seems impossible that you'll bring that together.
Well, that's where the profile test comes in handy. For instance, you mentioned values. If that's important to you, then it's going to be important for you to find a man who agrees with you on that. As far as the profile test, if you're low conformity and low religion, you're most likely a Democrat. If
Mm.
you're high conformity and high religion, you're most likely a Republican. And until COVID, I never even had to talk about religion. And then all of a sudden, I get, if he voted for Trump, I can't meet him.
Yeah.
So I went through that for like 2 years. Who did they vote for? Never thought I'd have to ask, who did you vote for? Then when that settled down, are they vaccinated? Another
Mm.
question I never thought I'd have to ask.
Do you ask
So
though? Because I'm actually kind of
I
curious about
do
this one.
have to, I mean, if it's
Mm.
going to be a showstopper for the person I want to match them with, I
Hmm.
do ask.
Okay.
And so, but again, the test pretty much defines the political part of it.
Hmm.
And it's sad to me how people will limit themselves over those things because, I mean, again, if you're traditional and religious, most likely one, low in conformity, low in religiously, most likely the other way. But I think politics was never a part of matchmaking until COVID. Even when Trump won in 2016, it was a little bit of yeah, but nothing that lasted until COVID. And
I mean,
then everybody was like, you
we
know,
could go much deeper on that on the social implications of it, but there has been a rift, and it's I feel like it's really driven by mainstream media. There's a lot of us and them. There's a lot of divisiveness in communication, and it really has kind of split the nation, but also a lot of relationships. Like even before COVID, would you ever have considered that some people wouldn't talk to their family members based on a shot?
Never.
And it's insane to me that that was ever even an option. But now, this is the world we live in.
Well, people draw the line in the sand. And, I had a lady who told me that anybody who voted for Trump had no common sense. And anyhow, she went on with a whole bunch of adjectives that weren't very kind. And I'm like, you're talking about I don't know, 80 million people. So
Yeah, I know.
I think that's a generalizing. But the political thing is just what it is, and it's in our face every day, all day long, and even more so now in an election year. I've already started hearing it again.
Mm.
If he voted for Trump, I can't meet him. Okay, no problem. You won't meet him. And you're probably not
It's
going to
hard
be
in that
compatible
town.
with, well, they probably wouldn't be compatible with somebody that voted for Trump, because again, the scores would define that to some extent.
Hmm.
But it's just crazy how it has affected dating. And I never thought I'd see anything like it. But again, 20 and 21 were my two best years in business. And now I'm just back to being humbled again. It's okay.
It's okay. Life
This,
changes.
this too shall pass.
We innovate when we're struggled.
I
So
know.
let's talk about your successes, though. Let's talk about how many people you have matched. What is your ratio, like your success ratio?
It's hard to measure that after 33 years. I know I have over 700 clients married. I know I probably have 3 times as many clients in long-term relationships and committed relationships that aren't married. And then I have people especially by people getting in their 60s and 70s, maintaining separate residences and staying in committed long-term relationships has become really popular in that age range.
Puts a whole different spin on the two twin beds in the bedroom. But yes.
It does. It does.
Are you finding that people aren't getting married anymore? And that's a
Very
broad statement, but less people are getting married.
much less people, many
Why do you
less.
think that is?
Well, I think a lot of it is because people have been, when I first got into this business in the late 80s, if somebody was divorced more than once, people would say, what's wrong with them? Now, after the internet dating has evolved over all these years, 2 divorces, 3 divorces, 4 divorces. I think that's a part of it. So many people have been divorced multiple times. Not only that, but marriage is just not the preferred option it used to be in any age range, not even in the 30s.
Well, divorce
And
is
that,
really expensive too.
well, it's, it only takes one person to want a divorce.
Mm.
So, you might have nothing to say about that and still have to go through it. But I think marriage has become a less favored option for sure. Even in age ranges and with scores, I would expect that they would want to get married. So I don't know. I think it's just the way that it's going. And
Hmm.
I hope that, I don't think marriage is a necessary component for a successful relationship. But if you think it is, then the person that you're going to be with must think it is.
Mm.
But it's just not something that I find people being as insistent on as they, not, I shouldn't say insistent, but as preferring. Let's put it that way. I don't see as many people preferring to get married. And that's definitely been that way for at least the last 4 or 5 years. And I don't think
Wow.
COVID had anything to do with that. I think that's just the way that we're going
Hmm.
in the whole wide world. I don't know. It's just
Oh,
not the
so much
preferred.
to look forward to.
Well, just know that you, if you have that long-term goal, don't
Mm.
waste your time with somebody who doesn't. On the other hand, I ask people what their long-term goal is, and I've had people tell me they'd never get married. Get married. I have people tell me they'd never live with someone. Live with someone. I don't think you really know until you meet the person you're considering that you might marry or live
I think
with.
that's fair. I think
So
that's totally fair.
when I get there, I have their long-term goal, but and I share it. If somebody tells me they won't get married, they don't want to get married, I can still match them with somebody who wants to get married, but they go into it knowing that that other person's not sure or they know they don't want to get married. It hardly ever keeps anybody from meeting someone because they
Hmm.
also know that you don't really know until you meet the person.
Right. But I think, people have the problem with, and I could go on and on about dating apps. Obviously, I've been a little traumatized, but the problem is you go through and you check all the boxes. Like these are my boxes. And then I see your boxes. And whether if I disagree with any of them, we're done. It's like, well,
Well,
all right, sorry.
the more you date and the more basis of comparison you have, the more picky you become.
Mm.
And there's nothing wrong with being picky as long as you're being realistic and you have as much to offer as you're looking for in return.
Mm-hmm.
So, I would say keep that in mind too. You want.
I try.
How long have you been single?
Oh, well, this is getting personal. 8 years. I mean, I did some long distance dating, but I've
Long
been on a
distance.
lot of dates. Long distance dating is a poor choice, I think, for anyone too.
It's not going to work unless one person's willing to move.
Right.
That's the bottom line. Or two people can be okay with long distance dating forever. Whatever works for two people, that's all
Mm.
that it takes.
Hmm.
It can look like a lot of different things.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't feel like it works for me, but I'm also, I'm kind of a special cookie, but yeah, so
We're all,
about 8 years.
we're all special in our own ways. Everybody has their little unique and special things about
Mm.
them.
Yeah, but I'm finding that some of my girlfriends, and it's really that arc of like 45 and over, right? We've had marriages, had some kids. Now we're in that second phase of life. Finding that person that fits into that life with, the same ambitions and same lifestyle, and it gets trickier. The older you get, it does get a little bit trickier. And there are nights where staying home with my son a lot more fun than going out on a bad date. Hanging out with my girls, having some laughs over a glass of wine, a lot better than a stupid conversation that I never, will get my time back for. So, that's the world I live in where I'm like, well,
Well, think of all the time you've spent on online dating.
I'm done. I'm done. I think life is too short to sit there and swipe again, it's like looking at a yearbook. Like, I don't know
It's a
anything about
shot
your
in the
year.
dark at the very best, and at the very most, it's dangerous.
Mm,
So
true.
I think people have to be really careful when they're online today.
Definitely. Definitely. So how do people find you if they want to invoke your services?
They can go to my website, perfectlymatchdating.com. On the homepage, it says click here to take the profile test. It's 46 questions. It comes directly to me. I don't have anybody who works for me or with me, so it's all confidential. I'll call you with your scores, and then if you're interested, we'll set a time for you to come in for the interview. You can also just call me at 719-260-1000, and I'll be happy to talk to you about it.
Well, I appreciate your time today. You've been so generous with all of the questions that I've had for you and so
Well,
giving
I
us all your
love talking
information.
about matchmaking. I love helping people find the right person. I mean, it's one decision that you're going to make in your life that's going to probably affect the rest of your life more than anything else you do.
Hmm.
So I think finding the right person to share your life with should be more of a priority for people. And if you're out there running into people who are just looking for hookups, don't waste your time. Just don't waste your time. Go to a matchmaker, find a good one.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Donna, you're amazing. I thank you so
Well,
much.
you're sweet, Wendy. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share this information. And it was fun talking to you.
You too. You too. We'll do this again because I'll have more questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm ready when you are.
Awesome.